Sometimes life hides your greatest miracle behind the person everyone ignores. Maybe that's why you're here, because a part of you still believes that quiet souls and broken hearts can meet somewhere between pain and grace. It began on a rainy Thursday, when the city lights blurred into streaks of gold against the glass walls of Stirling Tower. Inside that fortress of ambition, laughter echoed off marble floors, sharp, careless, and cruel. A janitor had just spilled a bucket of water near the main stage, and cameras turned as if catching prey. People smirked, whispering about the man in faded blue coveralls, as though his clumsiness was entertainment. But if they had looked closer, they might have seen the steady way his hands moved, or the kind of silence that only comes from someone who has seen too much, lost too much, and still chose kindness over bitterness. His name was Liam Carter. And though no one there knew it, he once held dying soldiers in his arms and whispered prayers into the desert wind. Tonight, he was just a man with a mop, cleaning the floor of a world that didn't see him. Across the room, the CEO, Sarafina Sterling, stood in the center of it all, radiant, poised, untouchable. The camera adored her. Her red dress caught the light like a flame, commanding every gaze. Yet behind her perfect posture, her heart beat with a rhythm she could not control, literally. For years, she had lived with a secret illness, a quiet betrayal inside her chest. No one could know. Weakness was a luxury she could not afford. And then, like fate deciding to draw both worlds together, their paths crossed in the most unexpected way. When the music swelled, Sarafina smiled for the cameras, her voice smooth, promising innovation, hope, the future. And just beneath the stage, Liam adjusted the wires that no one else noticed, ensuring safety for a crowd that never thought of him twice. 2 lives, one in the spotlight, one in the shadows, breathing the same air, existing within inches, unaware that destiny was already weaving their names together. Outside, thunder rolled. The rain turned fierce, hammering against the glass like a heartbeat. Liam glanced up, watching lightning flash across the skyline. For a moment, he thought about his daughter, Bonnie, waiting for him back home, probably drawing pictures of heroes again. She always told him, "Dad, you're my superhero," and he'd just laugh, shaking his head. Because heroes wore suits and spoke on stages. They didn't scrub floors for people who didn't remember their names. But fate has a strange way of proving us wrong. A drop of water fell from his mop and splashed across the polished tiles, reflecting Sarafina's face in perfect symmetry. 2 worlds mirrored in one fragile puddle, power and humility, beauty and grit, light and shadow. And somewhere deep inside that reflection, a promise began to stir. The next seconds would change everything. Sarafina pressed a hand against her chest, her smile faltering for just an instant. The pressure came like an iron fist, stealing her breath. Cameras flashed, applause roared, but Liam noticed. Maybe because soldiers never stop watching for danger. Maybe because his heart had learned how to listen to pain even when no one else could hear it. When she fell, time shattered. The glass world around them broke into silence. Her daughter screamed, and Liam moved before thought could catch him. The mop clattered to the ground, water spilling like silver across the marble. He reached her in 3 strides, voice firm, commanding the room to obey. The crowd parted, fear trembling in their throats, as this invisible man became the anchor of the storm. And while his hands pressed life back into her chest, something unspoken passed between them, like 2 lost hearts recognizing each other in the chaos. Later they would call it fate, but maybe it was just love disguised as duty. Maybe it was the universe's way of reminding us that kindness never disappears. It only waits for its moment to be seen. As the sirens wailed and cameras caught the scene, one truth unfolded. Sometimes the one you least expect is the one meant to save you. If this story touched a quiet corner of your heart, maybe it's because you've been unseen too, doing your best, quietly holding the world together. So stay with this story. Let it remind you that your light still matters, even in the shadows. And if you feel something stirring inside, a whisper saying, "This is me," then don't scroll away. Like, comment, or subscribe. Not for me, but for every soul who still believes that love can bloom in the most ordinary places. Because sometimes the janitor isn't just cleaning the floor, he's preparing the ground where miracles will grow. And this was the night the miracle began. The world slowed into silence. Every sound, the applause, the murmurs, the music, fell away until all that remained was the desperate rhythm of Liam's hands pressing against Serafina's chest. His movements were sure, almost sacred. Count, breathe, press, like a prayer he had whispered too many times before. He didn't think, didn't feel fear, only instinct and faith. Her pulse was fading, her skin turning pale beneath the harsh lights. Around him, faces blurred into shadows. All he saw was the woman gasping for life and the little girl crying beside her. Audrey's trembling voice pierced him like a blade. "Please, don't let my mum die." It was the same tone Bonnie had once used when asking if angels could hear her daddy's prayers. That memory anchored him. He looked at Audrey and whispered, "She's going to be okay," though he wasn't sure if he said it for her or for himself. When the defibrillator arrived, his voice cut through the chaos, calm and certain. "Clear." The electric jolt lifted Serafina's body, and for a heartbeat the world held its breath. Then, faint, fragile, a pulse returned. Her chest rose. Liam exhaled, his shoulders trembling with the weight of relief. Paramedics rushed in, and he stepped back quietly, as if fading back into the shadows he had come from. No applause, no pride, just silence. He watched as they carried her away, the red dress now creased and torn, a symbol of human fragility beneath all the power she wore. Audrey clung to her mother's hand, whispering through tears. Liam stayed until the ambulance doors closed. The flashing lights disappeared into the city's heart, and only then did he realize his hands were shaking. He went to the utility sink, washed the scent of adrenaline and fear off his palms, and stared at the ripples in the water. Beneath that rippling reflection, he saw his own exhaustion, the same eyes that had once watched soldiers die and wondered why he'd survived. Back home, his small apartment smelled faintly of rain and soap. Bonnie was asleep on the couch, her schoolbooks open, her little hand resting on a drawing of 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing under a bright yellow sun. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered, voice raw. "Today was something." She didn't stir. He sat down beside her, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, hope tangled with fear, like a heartbeat learning how to trust again. The next morning, headlines flooded the internet. CEO collapses on stage. Unknown employee saves her life. Liam's face appeared in blurry photos, mid-action, eyes focused, sweat on his brow. The comments were endless: praise, speculation, curiosity. But Liam didn't read any of it. He still scrubbed the same floors, fixed the same broken pipes, moved through corridors where people now paused to whisper his name with awe instead of mockery. Yet he kept his head down. Fame had never healed him before. It wasn't going to start now. In her hospital room, Serafina woke to the soft beeping of a heart monitor. Her throat was dry, her body weak, but she was alive. She turned her head, saw Audrey curled up asleep beside her bed, and something inside her broke open. Tears she hadn't cried in years slipped down her temples. She had built her life around control, around never letting anyone see her fall, and yet when her world crumbled, it was a stranger who had caught her, a janitor. Her doctor entered quietly, explaining what had happened, how close it had been. "You're lucky," she said. "That man saved your life." The words lingered in the air like incense. That man. Serafina repeated them silently. A man she had probably walked past 100 times without noticing. Someone whose name she didn't even know. For the first time in years, she asked to rest. Not for the company, not for the next project, but for herself. As she drifted back into sleep, she dreamt of steady hands pressing against her heart. And in that dream, she felt something more than gratitude. It was safety, warmth, the kind she hadn't felt since her father died. 3 days later, she stood by the hospital window, wrapped in a white robe, watching the city pulse below. The board had been calling non-stop, wanting to contain the story. But she couldn't stop thinking about those blue gloves, the calm voice that commanded chaos into order. She needed to see him, to thank him, yes, but more than that, to understand him. Because somewhere between the fall and the saving, something inside her had shifted. The world had seen a hero, but she had seen something else. A man who reminded her that even the smallest lives carried light strong enough to save another. Down in the basement of Stirling Tower, Liam repaired a leaking pipe, humming softly under his breath. Life had returned to its routine rhythm, but deep inside there was a pull he couldn't explain, a sense that what had happened wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. The night he saved her, he'd felt her heartbeat beneath his palms, fragile yet fierce, as if life itself had whispered, "Don't let go yet." He hadn't, and now, somehow, he couldn't. In another part of the city, Serafina turned from the window, her reflection faint against the glass. For years, her world had been filled with people who wanted something from her, respect, approval, power. But the man who had saved her wanted nothing. Maybe that's what made her heart ache the most. Outside, the rain returned, soft and cleansing, the same rain that had fallen the night they met. It carried a quiet promise in its rhythm, washing away the distance between two lives that were never meant to cross. And yet, somehow did. And as the city lights flickered awake, two hearts, one healing, one still hiding, beat in quiet harmony. unknowingly drawing closer to the moment when gratitude would turn into something deeper, something neither of them could have planned. Love. The first time she saw him again, the world seemed to pause. It wasn't in the grand lobby of Stirling Tower, or in a meeting room surrounded by polished glass and ego. It was in the quiet basement corridor that smelled faintly of soap and metal, where Liam Carter was fixing a faulty valve with the same focus and patience he'd used to save her life. Serafina stood at the end of the hallway, dressed simply in a pale cream coat, her hair tied back, her heart steady but uncertain. For a woman who commanded rooms full of executives and negotiated million-dollar contracts, she had never felt so unsure of what to say. Gratitude seemed too small, too fragile a word for what she owed him. He didn't notice her at first. His head was bowed, his sleeves rolled up, the scar on his wrist catching the dim light. The steady rhythm of his movements filled the air, measured, healing, calm. When he finally looked up and saw her, surprise flickered across his face, followed by quiet composure. "Ms. Stirling," he said softly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You shouldn't be down here." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And yet, here I am." There was no arrogance in her tone this time, only warmth. She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the concrete. "You saved my life," she said. The words trembled, raw and real. "I don't think thank you is enough." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." But she didn't agree. "I do. You didn't just keep my heart beating, you reminded me that it was still alive." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of machinery filled the silence, gentle and grounding. Serafina studied him, the quiet strength in his posture, the honesty in his eyes. There was no pretense, no calculation. Just a man who had known pain and still chosen gentleness. "I read your file," she said softly. "Army medic. You left after the war." His jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "And yet you still save people," she whispered. Liam exhaled slowly, setting down his wrench. "Sometimes you don't choose what stays with you. You just learn to live with it." Something in her chest tightened. She understood that. She, too, carried ghosts. Her father's death, her illness, the loneliness of leadership. All the masks she wore in daylight had never protected her from the ache of being unseen. And yet, standing here, under the hum of fluorescent light, she felt seen in a way that startled her. "You remind me of someone," she murmured. "My father used to say that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet thing that keeps moving, even when no one's watching." Liam gave a small nod, eyes softening. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said. "He'd have liked you." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came slowly, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Then I'd have been honored." For the first time since the day of the collapse, she felt her body truly breathe. There was something profoundly healing about his presence, steady, unhurried, unafraid. He didn't look at her like she was the CEO. He looked at her like she was human. Their silence wasn't awkward, it was full, like two souls resting beside each other after walking too far alone. When she finally spoke again, her voice was gentle. "Would you have coffee with me? Somewhere quiet. No cameras, just as two people who survived the same storm." He hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." The cafe she chose was tucked away on a narrow street near the river. No one there recognized them. They sat by the window as the rain fell outside, the kind that softened everything it touched. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea, savoring the warmth. He took his coffee, black, stirring it absent-mindedly. They didn't talk about work or the company. They talked about small things, books their daughters loved, how the city smelled different after rain, how silence could sometimes say more than words. Each story peeled away a layer, revealing something raw and tender underneath. At one point, Sarafina laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. It was soft, melodic, like the sound of healing. Liam watched her quietly, and though he didn't say it aloud, something in him stirred, an ache he had long buried beneath years of solitude. When she reached across the table, her fingers brushed against his hand. It was accidental, but neither of them pulled away. The touch was simple, human, alive. And in that moment, time seemed to hold its breath again. Outside, the river reflected the grey sky, endless and calm. Sarafina looked at him and thought of the night he had pressed life back into her chest. She remembered his voice, steady, certain, alive with faith. Now, across this small table, she felt that same quiet strength reaching her in another way. "Liam," she said softly, "when you saved me, did you think I'd make it?" He looked into her eyes. "I never think about that. I just keep going until I can't." She smiled faintly. "That's what you've been doing all your life, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but the truth lived in his silence. The rain began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds in pale gold streaks. She leaned back, her chest lighter than it had been in years. Around them, the world kept moving, cars passing, people laughing, but between them there was stillness, a fragile peace that felt like a beginning. When they stood to leave, she lingered by the door. "You said I don't owe you anything," she whispered, "but maybe I do. Maybe I owe you the chance to be seen, too." He met her gaze. "I'm not sure I know how anymore." "Then let me remind you," she said. And for the first time he let someone in. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough for the warmth of her words to reach the corners of his heart that had forgotten how to feel. They walked together through the soft drizzle, their shoulders brushing, the city glistening around them like a promise. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and he didn't dare hope for more than this moment. But something had shifted between them, something gentle, steady, healing, and though neither spoke it aloud, both understood. Love sometimes begins not with grand confessions, but with quiet gratitude between two souls who have learned how to survive. As they disappeared into the fading light, the city seemed to exhale, a sigh of peace, of possibility. And for the first time in a long while, both of them believed that maybe, just maybe, their hearts had found a reason to start beating again. The days that followed felt softer, though the world around them remained the same. Sarafina returned to her office, to the glass walls and polished desks, to the rhythm of meetings and signatures and decisions that shaped lives she would never meet. But something inside her had changed. She no longer walked through the building without noticing. She saw the janitors, the security guards, the cafeteria staff, and she greeted them with warmth that startled even herself. It wasn't charity, it was awakening. Sometimes she would catch herself glancing toward the basement level during lunch breaks, wondering if Liam was there, working in silence as always. She didn't know what this feeling was exactly. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something quieter, like the sound of rain on glass. Gentle, patient, promising. He had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. That strength wasn't measured in power, but in kindness. Liam, meanwhile, tried to return to his ordinary routine, but the echo of her voice lingered in every quiet space he entered. He had faced gunfire and loss, but nothing had unsettled him quite like the tenderness in her eyes when she said, "Let me remind you." That simple promise had pierced through the armor he'd built around himself. He found himself smiling at small things, Bonnie's laughter, the hum of morning coffee, the way sunlight crept through the blinds in golden threads. Healing, it turned out, didn't always come with noise. Sometimes it was just the quiet acceptance that life could still hold beauty. Then one evening, Dante, the security chief, found him near the service elevator. "The CEO wants you upstairs," he said. Liam raised an eyebrow. "Now?" Dante nodded, lowering his voice. "It's about the board. Something's brewing." When he entered the executive floor, the air was colder. The boardroom lights glowed white against the polished table. Serafina sat at one end, calm but tired. Around her, the other directors, Henry Leon, Oliver Flynn, Matilda Constance, spoke in clipped tones. Liam hesitated at the door until she gestured for him to come in. "Mr. Carter," Henry said, his voice carrying that practiced politeness that always felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. "You've become quite the name lately. The media is persistent. Some of your actions have gone viral." Liam stood still, his posture steady. "I didn't ask for that." "Precisely," Henry continued, "and that's why we'd like to keep things quiet. Ms. Sterling's condition is a private matter. We can't risk investor panic." Serafina's gaze lifted, cool and sharp. "Henry?" He ignored her. "We're prepared to compensate you generously for your discretion. A signed agreement, a bonus." "That's enough," she interrupted. Her voice was soft but carried weight. Everyone stopped. She turned to Liam, her eyes warm, unwavering. "You don't owe us silence. You owe yourself truth." The room stiffened. Henry's jaw clenched. "Serafina, you can't be serious." "I am." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't back down. "We built this company to save lives, to create technology that gives people a chance. How can we stand for that if we hide the very truth that proves it works?" Liam looked at her then, really looked. In her eyes, he saw something fierce and human. A woman tired of pretending strength meant perfection. Oliver Flynn shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on Liam. "You think this is noble, Ms. Sterling? You don't know what you're risking. That man—" He stopped himself, but the bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Serafina turned toward him. "What are you implying, Oliver?" His fingers tapped the table. "I did some digging. Liam Carter, former Army medic, served overseas 10 years ago. He's the one who let my brother die." The words fell heavy. Serafina froze. Liam's shoulders tensed, his breath catching for just a second. The silence that followed was unbearable. Oliver rose from his chair, anger spilling through his composure. Sergeant Enoch Flynn, my brother. He bled out in the field while this man saved someone else. You want to call him a hero? He's a coward." Liam didn't defend himself. His hands clenched at his sides, but his voice, when it came, was quiet. "Your brother was hit in the femoral artery." "There was nothing anyone could do." Oliver's voice cracked. "You chose someone else." Liam's eyes dimmed, the weight of years pressing on him. "I made the only choice I could." Seraphina's chest tightened as she looked between them. She saw the pain in Oliver's eyes, the grief that had turned to bitterness, and the quiet guilt in Liam's, the kind that never left even after time softened its edges. The argument dissolved into silence. Finally, Seraphina stood. "We can't let the past turn into poison," she said softly. "What Liam did that day didn't erase what he's done since. He saved my life. He saved this company's purpose." Oliver looked away, his anger collapsing under the weight of exhaustion. For the first time, Seraphina saw not hatred, but grief. She didn't speak further. There was nothing left to win. When the meeting ended, she followed Liam into the empty hallway. He stood by the glass window, staring at the skyline painted in twilight. "I didn't want this to come out," he said quietly. "That story's not something I'm proud of." She stepped beside him, close enough to feel the quiet ache in his voice. "You made an impossible choice," she said, "and you've been at war with it ever since." He gave a small, broken laugh. "You sound like my conscience." "Maybe I'm just someone who understands guilt too well," she replied. Her hand brushed against his sleeve, a touch that carried no pity, only connection. "You've carried it long enough. You don't have to keep bleeding for it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned to her. The city lights reflected in his eyes, gentle and infinite. "You believe people can heal from anything?" She smiled faintly. "Not from anything, but from enough to start again." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony, watching the city shimmer below. The wind carried the faint hum of distant traffic and the quiet comfort of knowing she wasn't alone in her brokenness anymore. Down in his small apartment, Liam sat by the window, a photo of his old unit in his hand. For the first time, he allowed himself to forgive. Not the past, not completely, but enough to breathe without pain. The next morning, the news broke. CEO to address medical emergency, credits Janitor for saving her life. The press conference was scheduled. The world would know the truth, not as scandal, but as testament. And as Seraphina looked into the mirror before facing the cameras, she whispered to her reflection, "This isn't about fear anymore. It's about light." Downstairs, Liam adjusted his shirt collar, uncomfortable in the borrowed suit. He wasn't used to attention, but when he saw her waiting by the stage, calm and radiant, something in him settled. She turned, met his gaze, and smiled. The air between them was quiet, full of unspoken understanding. Two souls scarred by different battles, both finally choosing to stop hiding, and in that silence, surrounded by the hum of lights and the murmurs of an expectant crowd, a new chapter began, not of fame or forgiveness, but of something gentler, deeper, healing. The kind of connection that doesn't demand, doesn't rush, it simply is. She took the microphone, ready to speak her truth. He stood behind her, not as her savior, not as her subordinate, but as her equal. And in that fragile, powerful moment, both of them felt it. how love often begins in the spaces where two wounded hearts finally learn to breathe together. The morning of the press conference dawned grey, the kind of soft light that carries both fear and renewal. Stirling Tower, the place where everything had begun, was once again filled with people. Cameras lined the hall. Reporters murmured like distant waves. But this time, the energy felt different. Less spectacle, more sincerity. There was no red carpet, no glittering banners, just a simple stage and two people who had walked through the fire and come out changed. Serafina stood in front of the mirror, her reflection calm but human. No makeup, but a hint of lipstick. No armor, but the quiet strength in her gaze. Her heart monitor beeped faintly under the thin fabric of her navy suit, a subtle reminder of the life that had almost left her. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled, grounding herself in the sound. She wasn't there to impress anymore. She was there to tell the truth. Outside the green room, Liam waited, adjusting the cuffs of his borrowed shirt. His hands, calloused from years of work, looked strangely out of place against the crisp fabric. Yet, when he caught his reflection in the polished glass, he didn't see the janitor anymore. He saw the man who had finally stopped running from his past. When she entered the room, their eyes met. No words were needed. She offered him a quiet nod, the kind that said, "We're in this together." The hum of cameras grew louder as they stepped onto the stage. For a moment, the flashes blinded them both. Then, as Serafina reached the podium, silence fell. Her voice, when it came, was steady and clear. 2 weeks ago, I collapsed on this very stage, she began. I went into cardiac arrest. I'm alive because of one man's courage. His name is Liam Carter. The room erupted with murmurs, then applause. She didn't pause for effect. She simply continued. He's not a doctor, not an executive, not someone the world usually notices. He's a janitor, a man who shows up every night to make this building shine while the rest of us sleep. That night, when my heart stopped, he acted without hesitation. He performed CPR, used the Aegis AED we created, and gave me back my life. Liam stood behind her, hands folded, head slightly bowed. The weight of her words pressed gently on his chest, not pride, but something softer, gratitude. Serafina continued, her tone tender but firm. I've spent years building a company dedicated to saving lives, yet I hid my own fragility. I was afraid of being seen as weak. But today, I stand here alive because someone saw me as human. Not as a title, not as a CEO, but as a person who needed help. She paused, her eyes finding Liam's. And maybe that's what true strength is. Not pretending we're invincible, but allowing others to lift us when we fall. The room was utterly still. Reporters who came expecting corporate statements now listened like students at a sermon. She smiled softly, voice trembling just enough to feel real. From this day forward, every Sterling building will have free CPR and AED training. Every employee, from the boardroom to the basement, will be prepared to save a life. Because life doesn't care about rank or status. It just needs a willing heart. Then she turned slightly, gesturing toward him. Liam, would you say something? He hesitated, the air thick with attention. When he stepped forward, his voice was low, but carried a quiet conviction that made every word feel alive. "I've spent most of my life trying not to be noticed," he began. "It's easier that way. You do your work, you keep your head down, and you hope what you do means something, even if no one ever says it out loud." He paused, glancing at Serafina, then at the faces in the crowd. That night wasn't about heroism. It was about doing what any of us should do when someone needs help. I just happened to be there. He drew a breath, his tone softening. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the smallest moments, the ones you think no one sees, can change everything. You don't need to be powerful to make a difference. You just need to care." The words sank deep into the room. Serafina's eyes glistened. Somewhere in the back, Oliver Flynn lowered his gaze, the anger he once carried beginning to dissolve into something like peace. When the press conference ended, the applause was thunderous, not the kind born of spectacle, but of truth. Outside, the world had already begun to write their story, the janitor who saved the CEO's life. But for the two of them, it wasn't about headlines. It was about something simpler, breathing freely again, knowing that their paths had crossed for a reason larger than either could name. Later that night, when the building emptied and silence reclaimed the hallways, Serafina found him in the lobby, standing before the new AED display. The soft light glowed over his features. "You spoke beautifully," she said. He smiled faintly. "So did you." They stood side by side, looking up at the tall glass walls. The city outside shimmered with reflections of headlights and rain, the same rain that had once washed away the night of their first meeting. "I used to think this place was cold," she said quietly, "all glass and steel, but now it feels alive." "That's because you filled it with heart," he said. She turned to him, the warmth in her gaze unguarded. "You helped me remember how." There was no need for more. Their silence was enough. The kind of silence that feels like safety, like belonging. When he finally walked her to her car, the air between them carried a softness neither could quite explain. She lingered, one hand on the door, her eyes holding his for a long, wordless moment. "Liam," she whispered, "thank you for saving me." He smiled, the kind of smile that healed without trying. "Maybe you saved me too." And though neither reached for the other, something invisible passed between them, a promise made not with words, but with understanding. A promise that their lives, once separate, had now intertwined in ways that neither power nor circumstance could undo. As she drove away, he watched the tail lights fade into the city's pulse, his heart strangely light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He felt present, seen, alive. Upstairs, the building's lights dimmed one by one, leaving the lobby bathed in the golden hush of midnight. The reflection of the AED shimmered faintly against the marble floor, a symbol of second chances. And somewhere within that quiet, two souls, though apart, carried the same rhythm, the slow, steady beat of hearts that had finally found a reason to begin again. The night of the charity gala felt like the beginning of something hopeful. Sterling Medical had turned an old research center into a warm, glowing space filled with soft lights, laughter, and quiet pride. The event wasn't about profit or prestige. It was about the lives saved, the awareness spread, the spark that had begun with a janitor and a heartbeat. Serafina moved through the crowd gracefully, no longer as the distant CEO, but as someone real, open, radiant in a navy gown that shimmered like moonlight. When people spoke to her, they saw not just authority, but warmth. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. And somewhere in that same room, Liam Carter stood near the back, uncomfortable in another borrowed suit, hands tucked into his pockets as if trying not to take up too much space. He didn't belong to that world, or so he told himself. But when he saw her across the room, her laughter soft, her expression calm, he felt a quiet ache bloom in his chest. She glanced up then, as if sensing him, and their eyes met. One small smile from her, and the distance between them disappeared. Bonnie tugged at his sleeve, her little hand clutching a drawing she had made for her father. Beside her was Audrey Sterling, equally proud, holding another sheet of paper covered in bright crayons. Across their drawings, in uneven letters, the words read, "Heroes wear gloves." The two girls giggled as they ran up to show Serafina, who knelt to see them. She looked up at Liam, eyes shining. "You've made quite an impression," she said softly. He smiled, that small, reluctant smile that seemed to carry the weight of everything he'd survived. They did all the work. For a few precious hours, life felt healed. Music filled the room, delicate and alive. People spoke about change, about gratitude, about courage. But then, just as the evening began to settle into calm, a strange flicker of light caught Liam's eye. The chandelier dimmed for half a second, then brightened again. A faint smell of smoke drifted through the air. It was subtle at first, so faint that most people didn't notice. But Liam had spent a lifetime watching for the small things others ignored. He followed the scent, moving quietly toward the side corridor near the exhibit hall. Then he saw it. A spark, a glow, the beginning of something dangerous. Within seconds, the smell of burning wires grew stronger. "Dante!" he called to the head of security. "Kill the power to the West Wing! Now!" Panic rippled through the crowd as smoke began to billow along the ceiling. Someone screamed. Alarms shrieked. The main exit jammed, the crash bar refusing to budge, just like the one Liam had reported weeks earlier. He felt the air tighten with fear. "Everyone move to the north side," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay low. Cover your mouths." But as people surged toward safety, a smaller sound reached him, children crying. He turned and saw it, a side room filling with smoke, the door half closed, small hands beating against the glass. 4 children trapped inside. One of them was Audrey. Time slowed. The world fell away. He didn't think. He ran. He grabbed a tablecloth, soaked it in a nearby water pitcher, and wrapped it around his face. The heat bit at his skin, the smoke thick and black. He dropped low, crawling through it, calling softly so they'd hear a voice to follow. "It's okay. I'm coming." Audrey's voice broke through the haze. "Mr. Liam." Her tiny hand reached toward him through the smoke. He gathered her close, counting the other children, checking their breathing. The door had locked from the outside, electronic seals triggered by the alarm. He scanned the room, found a maintenance box, pried it open, ripped out a bar of metal, and smashed the lock. The door gave way with a crack. "Hold hands," he ordered gently. "Don't let go." The corridor outside was a tunnel of fire. Heat pressed against his back. He led the children, one step at a time, remembering the drills he'd once run in the desert, the way fear could make people forget to breathe. He kept his voice steady. Almost there. Just a few more steps. Then, above them, a beam groaned. He turned in time to see it fall. He shoved the children forward, his arm rising instinctively to shield them. Pain tore through his shoulder as the beam struck, but he didn't stop. He pushed them onward, guiding them toward the faint outline of a door ahead. He kicked it open with everything he had left, and cold night air rushed in like salvation. Paramedics were waiting. Dante's face appeared through the haze. "You're insane," he said, grabbing Liam's good arm, pulling him away from the flames. "The door was jammed," Liam coughed, his voice hoarse. "Just like I said." Dante shook his head, eyes wet. "You were right about everything." He looked down at Audrey, still clutching Liam's sleeve. "You saved me again," she whispered, her small face streaked with soot and tears. Liam smiled weakly. "Guess it's becoming a habit." Later, footage from the gala would spread everywhere. Images of Liam carrying Audrey through the smoke, her tiny arms around his neck as debris fell around them. It would become a symbol of courage, of love, of humanity. But in that moment, all he felt was exhaustion and relief. At the hospital, his shoulder bandaged, he sat by the window, watching the city glow through the glass. Serafina entered quietly, still wearing traces of smoke on her gown. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, watching him, her heart full and aching. "You could have died," she said finally, her voice trembling. He met her gaze. "So could they." She walked closer, her steps slow. "You've saved my life twice now, and my daughter's. How do I even begin to thank you for that?" "You already did," he said softly. "You believed me." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She reached for his hand, hesitating, then holding it gently, her fingers warm against his. "You're more than what this world ever saw in you," she whispered. "You always were." He wanted to say something, but his throat tightened. So he only squeezed her hand back, letting silence speak what words could not. For a long time they sat like that, the city alive beyond the window, their hearts finding a rhythm of their own. And somewhere in the quiet, something inside both of them began to heal, the wound of being unseen, the ache of carrying too much alone. Outside, dawn touched the skyline with gold. Audrey was safe. Bonnie was home, and the air smelled of new beginnings. The world would soon know the story, but for now, in this room filled with morning light, there was only peace. Serafina leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't even realize it, do you? You keep saving people, but what you're really doing is teaching us how to live." Liam looked at her, the faintest smile curving his lips. "Maybe that's what we're all trying to do. Just keep each other alive long enough to start again." And in that fragile space between pain and peace, something unspoken blossomed. It wasn't yet love in the way stories describe it, but something deeper. A bond forged in fire, sealed by faith, and softened by the quiet certainty that healing, no matter how slow, always finds its way home. The city outside shimmered brighter, as if blessing their moment. Inside, they stayed in silence, two souls who had finally stopped running, holding on to the simplest, most beautiful truth of all. Sometimes, life brings two broken hearts together, not to complete each other, but to remind them that they were never truly broken to begin with. 2 days after the fire, the world seemed quieter. The storm of news cameras, articles, and interviews had calmed, leaving behind something softer, more human, a collective awe that one man could change so much simply by caring. But Liam didn't read the papers, didn't watch the headlines that now called him the guardian of Stirling. He stayed home, his shoulder in a sling, his apartment filled with the faint scent of antiseptic and sunlight. Bonnie had filled the table with her drawings, him and Audrey, two little girls with big smiles, and a woman in a red dress who held a glowing heart between her hands. In a corner, Bonnie had written in crooked letters, "Heroes don't fly, they walk." He smiled faintly when he saw it, though his chest tightened with a strange tenderness he couldn't quite name. He thought of Seraphina often, the way her voice had softened when she said his name, the way her eyes carried both strength and sorrow. They hadn't spoken since the hospital, but something inside him knew that silence wasn't distance. It was understanding. On the third morning, a knock came at the door. When he opened it, Oliver Flynn stood there, holding an envelope. His expression was unfamiliar, not anger, not pride, but something stripped of both, tired, human. "Can I come in?" Oliver asked. Liam hesitated, then nodded. They sat at the small kitchen table, the one Bonnie had painted with tiny stars. "I owe you an apology," Oliver began quietly. "For the things I said, for what I believed." He placed the envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph, a young soldier smiling at the camera, sunlight catching on his dog tags. "This is my brother, Enoch." Liam's breath caught. The name still carried the weight of years. "I've hated you for so long," Oliver continued, "because it was easier than facing the truth. I got the classified report. You did everything you could. My brother was gone before help could reach him. You saved the only one who could have survived." Liam closed his eyes. He had dreamed of those moments countless times. The blood, the sand, the screaming, the helplessness. He had carried them like a shadow that never lifted. Oliver's voice cracked. "You didn't fail him. War did. I blamed you because I needed somewhere to put my grief. But I see it now. You've saved more lives since that day than I ever will, including hers." Silence filled the room like a balm. Liam stared at the photograph, then reached for it. His fingers brushed the worn edges. "He was brave," he said softly. "He was," Oliver whispered. He took a small silver badge from his pocket and placed it on the table. Enoch's name was engraved in tiny, careful letters. "He would have wanted you to have this." Liam's throat tightened. "I can't." "You can," Oliver said, "because you've earned it." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. The quiet forgiveness that comes when two men finally stop fighting ghosts. Oliver stood, extended his hand, and Liam took it. The handshake was steady, grounding, and when Oliver left, the air felt lighter, as if the past had finally loosened its hold. That evening, Seraphina called. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Can you come to the office tomorrow?" "I need to see you." When he arrived the next morning, Stirling Tower felt different. The tension that once lived in its walls had been replaced by something almost peaceful. Posters of new safety programs lined the halls, and employees greeted him not with curiosity, but respect. He found her in a smaller office, sunlight spilling across her desk. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of elegance, just a simple white blouse and a look of quiet purpose. "The board wants to give you a plaque and a cash bonus," she said, "but I told them that's not enough." He frowned. "I don't need anything." "I know," she said softly, "but I'm not offering it as a reward. I'm offering a position." He blinked. "Director of Life Safety and Medical Readiness," she continued. "You'd oversee emergency training, evacuation planning, CPR certification. You'd make sure every Sterling building is prepared for anything." He looked at her, unsure what to say. "Why me?" "Because you see things other people miss," she said simply. "Because you care. Because you don't just save lives. You remind people that every life matters." He was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "On one condition." Her eyebrows lifted. "Which is?" "That every employee, from top to bottom, completes training within 90 days. No exceptions. And every hazard I've ever reported gets fixed within 30. Serafina smiled, that slow, luminous smile that seemed to make the air itself warmer. "Deal." They shook hands, and for a second her fingers lingered in his, soft but sure. "You've changed this company more than you realize," she whispered. He smiled faintly. Maybe it just needed someone to remind it to breathe. From that day on, Liam's life took on new rhythm. He walked the halls not as the ghost of the basement, but as the quiet heart of the building. People greeted him with nods, gratitude, respect. He trained executives and janitors side by side, teaching them CPR, how to use AEDs, how to stay calm when fear tried to take over. Everywhere he went, there was laughter again, and purpose. The culture shifted. The invisible people were no longer invisible. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the offices were empty, Serafina would find him sitting by the lobby fountain, sketching out evacuation maps or watching the city through the glass. They would talk, not about business, but about life, about the small things that made it bearable. She told him about her father, about the pressure she carried, about how the moment her heart stopped had somehow made her feel more alive. And he told her about the desert, about the ghosts he'd carried for too long, and how her courage had reminded him that redemption isn't a single act, it's a choice made every day. Their conversations grew longer, their silences softer. Sometimes, when words failed, they would simply sit together, listening to the hum of the city and the gentle splash of water nearby. It wasn't love that burst open like lightning. It was something slower, deeper, like the sun warming the earth after a long winter. A friendship that felt like home, a connection that healed by simply existing. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside, Serafina looked at him and said quietly, "You saved me twice, once from death and once from myself." He looked at her with that quiet sincerity that made her heart ache. "You saved me too," he said. "You gave me back a reason to keep showing up." They didn't need to say more. Their eyes said it all, the gratitude, the peace, the tenderness that lived beneath every breath they shared. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass. She turned toward the window, watching it blur the world into something gentle. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching, their reflections blending into one. In that stillness, the noise of the city faded away. There was only the warmth of being seen, the quiet truth of two souls who had found each other not by accident, but by grace. And as the rain washed the glass clean, the future unfolded before them, not in grand promises or perfect words, but in something far more powerful, the knowing that they were no longer alone, that their hearts, battered but still beating, had learned how to heal together. The night deepened. but the light between them remained steady and kind, and for the first time in years both of them felt that their stories, no matter how scarred, had finally begun to find their way home. A year passed like the slow unfolding of dawn. The city changed seasons, Stirling Tower changed faces, but some things remained, light spilling through tall glass, footsteps echoing in hallways that now breathed with new warmth, and the quiet pulse of something good that had grown from pain. On a clear spring morning, the lobby filled with gentle music and hushed anticipation. The air smelled faintly of lilies and polished brass. Employees stood side by side, executives beside janitors, doctors beside interns, each wearing a small patch on their badges. CPR certified, life ready. At the center of the lobby, under a white cloth, stood a sculpture, veiled and waiting. Two bronze hands, poised mid-motion, palms pressed over an invisible chest, the universal symbol of life being given back. Below it, a plaque waited to be revealed. Serafina stood near the front, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of her daughter, Audrey. Liam was beside them, his once blue coveralls now replaced by a neatly pressed uniform that bore a small stitched name, Director of Life Safety, L.L. Carter. The crowd quieted as Serafina stepped forward. Her voice was steady but full of light. A year ago, this place witnessed fear, chaos and loss, but it also witnessed courage. It witnessed what happens when someone chooses compassion over comfort, when someone listens to their heart, even in the noise of the world. This monument is not just for one man, it is for every unseen soul who keeps the world alive, one act of care at a time. She turned toward Liam. For those who've ever been overlooked, may this remind you that you are never invisible. Her words hung in the air like prayer. She reached for the cloth, tugged it free, and the bronze hands caught the morning light, glowing as if alive. Applause filled the hall, rolling through the glass like a rising tide. Liam stepped closer, reading the engraving beneath the sculpture. In memory of Enoch Flynn and every unsung hero who acts when it matters most. He felt a lump rise in his throat. In the front row, Oliver Flynn stood with damp eyes, one hand gripping his brother's silver badge. When Liam caught his gaze, Oliver nodded, a silent thank you that needed no words. As the applause faded, Serafina leaned closer. "You did this," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "We did this." The rest of the day unfolded like a dream. There were smiles, photographs, quiet tears. The employees lingered, talking about drills, safety, and how the company felt different now, more human, more alive. And through it all, Liam moved with calm ease, greeting people, answering questions, helping a young intern adjust a safety strap on an AED unit. He didn't feel out of place anymore. He belonged here, not as a savior, but as part of something good. Later that afternoon, Serafina invited him, Audrey, and Bonnie to the park. They spread a picnic blanket beneath a tree blooming with pink petals, the air warm with sunlight and laughter. The two girls played by the pond, chasing dragonflies, their giggles rising like music. "You ever think about how strange life is?" she asked, watching them. "How one moment of chaos can change everything?" He smiled faintly. "Strange, yes, but beautiful too." She turned to him, her expression soft. "Sometimes I think, if I hadn't collapsed that day, I would have never seen you. Not really. Not the man who keeps the lights burning when no one's looking. He looked at her, eyes kind. You would have found me eventually. You have a way of seeing what others miss. The afternoon light caught her hair, painting gold across her face. For a moment they just sat in the quiet rhythm of the world, the wind in the grass, the children's laughter, the steady thrum of life continuing. When Audrey ran up with a daisy crown and placed it on her mother's head, Seraphina laughed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Bonnie handed Liam a paper heart she'd folded herself. "For you," she said shyly. He smiled, tucking it into his pocket like treasure. Later, as the sun dipped low, Seraphina packed up the basket. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think being strong meant carrying everything alone. But you showed me that real strength is when someone chooses to carry the weight with you." Liam looked out at the horizon, where the light met the water. "And you taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means forgiving yourself enough to live again." The words drifted between them, simple and true. When their eyes met, there was no need for confession, no rush to name what existed. It was there, in the quiet, in the trust, in the gentle way their lives had woven together. That evening, as the city lights flickered awake, Liam returned to Stirling Tower for a safety drill. The building was empty, peaceful. He walked through the lobby, past the bronze sculpture, its hands glowing softly under the ceiling lights. He stopped and placed his palm gently against the metal. It was cool, but somehow it felt warm beneath his touch, as if it carried every heartbeat he had ever saved. He looked up at the plaque again and whispered, "Thank you." Not to himself, not to the world, but to everything that had brought him here. The pain, the mistakes, the people who had stayed, to the grace of second chances. He took a breath, stepped back, and smiled. His reflection shimmered in the polished floor, no longer the ghost of the basement, but a man who had finally come home to himself. Upstairs, lights flickered softly in Seraphina's office. She was still there, finishing her notes, but she paused for a moment and glanced down at the lobby. She saw him standing there, looking peaceful, and she felt an ache of gratitude fill her chest. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. He walked out into the night, where the air smelled like rain again. And as he looked up at the sky, he thought about how far they had both come, from loneliness to connection, from silence to understanding. Love, he realized, didn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived quietly, like breath returning after a long absence. And maybe that was enough. If you're still listening now, maybe something in this story touched the quiet part of your soul, the part that still believes in kindness, in second chances, in the healing power of love that grows slow and steady like dawn. Maybe it reminded you that you too are part of someone's miracle, even if you don't see it yet. So before you go, take a moment, breathe, let your heart soften. And if this story brought warmth to your night, leave a little light behind. Like, share, or leave a comment to tell someone what it meant to you. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind your heart it's still alive. May you be blessed with gentle days, with forgiveness that finds you in silence, and with love that arrives softly but stays forever.